Well, 3 years ago today, President Barack Obama became a Nobel Peace Prize winner. It was early on in his presidency, and many were wondering what exactly he did to deserve the prestigious award. President Obama himself seemed surprised. Here's a clip of his acceptance speech.
I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the considerable controversy that your generous decision has generated. In part, this is because I am at the beginning and not the end of my labors on the world stage. Compared to some of the giants of history who have received this prize, Schweitzer and King, Marshall and Mandela, my accomplishments are slight.
So here we are, 3 years later. And what exactly has he done since he won the prize? We've been fighting a war in Afghanistan for more than a decade, and the U.S. has been at the forefront of using and expanding drone warfare. The practice is controversial, to say the least, with civilian deaths breeding anti-American sentiment abroad. And our producers here at RT did some digging to find out just how many civilians were killed during President Obama's time in office. Between October 2009 and December 2011, 1,385 civilians were killed by U.S. forces. And during that time, there were 1,149 United States military casualties. And these figures don't include civilians and others that died indirectly. And of course, these numbers don't include deaths and casualties that happened in 2012 or so-called militants that were killed. With figures like that, we ask, has the Nobel Peace Prize winner really promoted peace? Has he really strengthened international cooperation? To discuss, I'm joined by Colonel Morris, retired Air Force attorney and professor now at Howard University Law School. Welcome, Colonel. So here we are 3 years later. Has the Nobel Peace Prize winner lived up to that title?
Now, I imagine the selection committee regrets making that decision 3 years ago today. They certainly ended up with egg on their face by picking President Obama, who I believe is the only Nobel Peace Prize winner with a kill list.
Seems to be the contradicting there. Do you think that maybe they just kind of jumped the gun and had just these high expectations that he didn't fulfill?
Well, you know, a lot of folks at the time, critics, said that they were premature, that the president had just taken office when he was selected for the award. He really hadn't accomplished anything yet, and perhaps he would earn it later, but it was premature. And a lot of folks speculated that it was that optimism for what President Obama's election represented. And certainly, if it comes to talking the talk, he can certainly talk the talk.
He can talk the talk, but can he walk the walk? I'm not sure that people would say that he can.
Well, certainly,
today.
The record over the last 3 years has shown, as you talked about earlier, the drone program, which is not just a military program. There's also a CIA drone program. That I'm not aware of any international law that permits the president to send a civilian agency out to kill people in other countries. The targeted assassination program, where American citizens, the president can designate them for assassination without trial. So just a number of steps over the past 3 years that really undermine the whole principle that Alfred Nobel intended when he donated his estate to charity in 1896 to give an award to someone who promotes peace.
And we do have a press release from the Nobel Prize Committee when they nominated him for this. Here it is. It says the Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided that the Nobel Peace Prize for 2009 is to be awarded to President Barack Obama for his extraordinary efforts to strengthen international diplomacy and cooperation between peoples. The committee has attached special importance to Obama's vision of and work for a world without nuclear weapons. So they pointed to his extraordinary efforts. I don't know when he had time to fulfill those efforts, but I mean, would you characterize his efforts as extraordinary even 3 years later?
Well, if you're just judging by talk, then yes, it's been some extraordinary talk about the rule of law and respect for sovereignty and diplomacy and all the things that we tend to do the opposite of what we said. You know, he gave a stirring speech in December 2009 when he went to Oslo and accepted the award about American values and principles and how that sets us apart from our adversaries, and that we're the standard bearer, you know, for those principles, and that we compromise our own values when we turn our backs on them. And he also said that that applies not only when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. And apparently it wasn't too long afterwards he decided it was too hard for us to live up to those principles.
Well, speaking of that speech, I do want to play a clip now of it. Let's take a listen.
We must begin by acknowledging a hard truth. We will not eradicate violent conflict in our lifetimes. There will be times when nations, acting individually or in concert, will find the use of force not only necessary, but morally justified.
Okay, so there he is there. He admitted at the time that violence would sometimes be necessary, and he said that sometimes violence is morally justified. Now, looking at his actions, would you call the violence that has played out, you know, these drone strikes in Pakistan and Afghanistan, are they morally justified?
I don't think so, and it's not just me. You know, former President Jimmy Carter, who himself is a Nobel Peace Prize winner in 2002, had an op-ed in the New York Times this past June where he talked about, particularly with the Arab Spring and emerging democracies, that America ought to be setting the example. And we are setting the example, but it's a bad example. And we're not living up to the principles that we espouse to others and that we claim we hold dear when we have programs like our drone program. You know, 10% of the Pakistani people have a favorable opinion of America, and 3/4 consider America to be their enemy. So if the objective is to win hearts and minds and to set an example, I don't think the program in Pakistan has achieved its goal.
Now, some might argue that the president inherited these violent policies from his predecessor, and he did work toward getting the United States away from that, the winding down of the wars, and he pulled the troops from Iraq. He's vowing to pull the troops from Afghanistan. What do you say to that?
Well, you're right. He did inherit some of these programs. In fact, in August of 2008, when he accepted the Democratic nomination to run for president, he said, John McCain may want to embrace the Bush policies, but I'm going to make change, and we're going to plot a new course and regain our moral authority and our moral standing. And here we are today, 4 years after that, and our moral authority is probably eroded more than it's been restored.
And beyond these drone strikes, some more of the peaceful efforts of the Obama administration or that he vowed to make, for example, the closing of Guantanamo Bay, that has not happened. We're at the end of his first term right now. Is that on Obama?
Well, he signed an executive order on January 22nd, 2009, ordering that the facility be closed not less than 1 year later. And that date has come and gone long ago. I know some people tend to blame Congress for his failure to close Guantanamo, but he's the commander-in-chief. So I think it's just been a lack of will, not a lack of opportunity on his part.
And I want to go back when I read the part of the press release where they hailed Obama for strengthening international diplomacy, especially in the wake of recent events. We have the assassination of our ambassador over in Libya, and we saw these anti-American protests. So, I mean, would you say that international diplomacy has been strengthened?
I don't think it has. I mean, that was certainly, if you look at the problems we're facing with terrorism, it's a global problem, not just a U.S. problem. So there needs to be greater global cooperation. But we've kind of had this go-it-alone attitude. And if we're not satisfied with what you're doing, we'll send a drone and do it ourselves. It was interesting, you know, when Ambassador Stevens' body came home on September 14th and President Obama went out to Andrews Air Force Base, he talked about American values and principles and said that the individuals that died gave their lives defending those principles, and the U.S. would remain a light unto the world. Well, right now we're being a warning light, not a guiding light.
All right. And, you know, this isn't the first time that Nobel Peace Prize, the winner has, the legitimacy of that has come into question. There was Henry Kissinger, Yasser Arafat. They were both previous winners. Also, that decision was controversial. Now a lot of people are saying President Obama perhaps didn't deserve it. Do you think that this is something that the committee regrets?
I would assume that they do. I don't know how you can look at the past 3 years since the award was bestowed upon President Obama and feel good about the choice that you made. Remember Alfred Nobel, when he set up this prize, it was to recognize the individual that most distinguished themselves by promoting peace and winding down armies and ending conflict. I don't think he envisioned a drone program and a kill list.
Yeah. Well, here he is running for election. Do you think he could redeem himself if he were to get reelected and be deserving of that prize?
I hope so. And you hear people say that, well, in a second term, there won't be a re-election. He can actually fulfill the promises about principles that he talked about in 2008. But if you recall George Bush, when they said, read my lips, no new taxes, he got voted out of office for not keeping his promise. I mean, I saw President Obama's lips move and say, I'm going to close Guantanamo, I'm going to end military commissions, and I'm going to restore America's moral standing in the eyes of the world.
All right. I guess we'll have to wait and see if he gets reelected, if he can live up to this prize, or well, I don't see Mitt Romney getting nominated at all. So,
well, I hope, certainly it could be a change for the worse. But he said he'll restore torture, he'll increase Guantanamo. So
right. Colonel, really appreciate you coming on the show. That was Colonel Morris Davis, retired Air Force attorney and professor at the Howard University School of Law.